Response video to Professor Anton video. And yeah, he's going to use the word agency a lot, and so this is his reformation, his wordification on the subject of determinism. And you know, I'm not going to say he was wishy-washy, but yeah, I mean, he just wants to retain some idea that there's some sort of, you know, not determined, not just played out in some sort of filtered way reality here, and that there isn't just this, that we're all just fodder. Okay, we're all just a piece, a cog. It's probably a better way to describe something that's linear. You know, something that progresses, and it's built on top of, built on top of, built on top of. You have to kind of go up it like a staircase, and we're just like bricks that are laid down in the staircase that is the progression of conversation. You know, sentences get different. They get longer. The stories we tell are very different. The conversations become very different with this progression of time and what has been said before us and what we're building upon. So you could think about what a conversation was like 200 years ago or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and you could say what was the, you know, the character of the conversation might have words might be more meaningful, and then they become less and less meaningful because that concept is destroyed. And you know, he even quotes in here this some guy. I'm not going to play the whole video. I'll just play the beginning and the end, maybe something like that. Anyway, or maybe not at all. We'll see how it goes. You know, some guy who quotes something about, you know, it's this language thing that it's about, you know, having the ability to understand. Like, say, if you learned a second language, that you might gain the ability to understand what words are kind of bullshit and what words need enhancement or redefinition. And I guess in this whole thing, that's what I'm going to argue, is that the power of language is basically just this idea of creating a mechanism to register, to make it possible to register properties and concepts, to describe them and then define them, to symbolize them and define them. You know, that's what a category would be, a word, and properties would be a description, and that we basically we communicate with these words that are just really a whole list of abbreviated definitions. So you could almost say that a word is an abbreviated definition. That's all it is. It's just an abbreviation. It's a shorthand for a concept. And there's a ton of words in our vocabulary still, you know, as we're building this staircase, where we still haven't cleaned. But the fact that we're having an argument about determinism, or a conversation about determinism, is in effect a demonstration of this, because even those conversations were a little gnarlier in the past. They still had them, you know, the very highest of elites, you know. I mean, that's sort of miraculous to even contemplate that, you know, 1,000 years ago there was people who were walking around realizing that this was all very mechanical, you know, that they were functioning in a very mechanical way. They saw it, that you know, criminals bred criminals, kind of a thing, and you know, it really mattered on what you put into a human being as to what you got out of a human being. And so they were sort of getting the idea that this isn't about any kind of freedom. Even this word freedom, this word free, it's one of these words that we should have already done away with. It absolutely doesn't mean anything. I mean, it has no meaning. There's no rational definition of this word, except in the context of describing what happens when something is released from a binding of some kind, a cage of some kind, a restriction of some kind. So it's a white space word. It's not describing the thing, it's describing the envelope the thing is in. it's not an accurate word in the way we're using it. It's rubbish. And then I would say agency is the same kind of word. It has no appropriate definition anymore. You can talk about what an individual's will is, what their program is disposed to produce, and it is disposed. The springs are compressed, and they will pop in certain ways on certain themes and concepts and reactions. But again, that's another thing, that's a word that's been underappreciated, might be the word reflex, because that's really all we are. We're just a bunch of chemical reactions that take place in this reflexive way. One thing does one thing, another thing does another thing, another thing does another thing, and then when you combine these things doing their thing, that sets up another matrix of happening, and that happening again can be spiral into a reaction, and it's much like a computer program. There is the analyze the circumstance. If this, do that. If that, do this. And that's all it's doing. And that's all we're doing. And we're doing it with a bulk of, you could call it software, but let's call it what it really is, which is information. I mean, information is the thing software processes, but it changes the processing. It's like a sub-program. We're loaded with the information. We process the information, create new information, reprocess, put it back into the database, change the database, and now the processing is changed, the result is changed, a new piece of information is created, it's put back into the database, on and on and on. And that's the staircase. That's the evolution of the knowledge base, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, there's still lots of words, spontaneous, random. These aren't accurately, commonly anyway, these words aren't commonly understood with accurate definitions. So as placeholders for definitions, they're placeholders for bad definitions of concepts that don't really exist. And that probably does substantially bend and pervert the product of this processing of the knowledge base if you're using words that are not accurate. That will, it's no different than having misinformation in the database is to have functional logical mechanisms, the if statements that are broken, that haven't been cleaned of the rubbish. I suppose the metaphor of that being a two-stage process is probably broken anyway, because the database becomes the logical mechanism in a sense. It does program the registers that do the logic through the language. So it becomes incorporated into the very processing itself. So it's probably just a one-stage process. Two-stage in the sense that the feedback is still a function of the process, where we just saying this, just reinforcing the idea that I know these words don't exist, will be stored in the function of my logic, and it'll be more and more of an automatic reaction. When I hear the word freedom, I react to it now, where I didn't before, because now I've run it through the logic a few times, and now I'm ready for it. Same with the word. The word random's been a problem for me for 20 years, so that one's been flipping registers in my brain. Every time I hear it, there's a caution. There's a danger of doing bad logic here because of this word. And spontaneous, I'd say, is a 50-year. That's been almost my whole life. That one's been a little tricky to figure out. I mean, it's been a no such thinger. From the very beginning, when I first asked questions about it, say, I don't know, go back to when I was 10 years old, and no one gave satisfactory answers to the very concept of a spontaneous. They would just keep pointing to something that does something very fast. And you're like, no, very fast is not spontaneous. So, yeah, and that is, I've already, people who've watched my videos know I've already made these arguments about how our consciousness is working and how it's really, really slow because it's the end product. The consciousness is just what percolates through the surface of the real computer. The real computer's doing, it's even like a computer screen. I mean, the computer screen throws this little static image up, and that's only one little, I mean, it's a very small representation. Controlling these million pixels is nothing compared to what the computer really did to make that. And what it's doing right now to even maintain it. It keeps reading a memory relocation. It keeps refreshing the screen just in case something does change. So whatever, 75 times a second, it's re-energizing these pixels to maintain this image as if it was static, and but the reality is it's not. And our consciousness is doing the same thing in the sense that my brain is working and whirling and processing all the time. It's playing with these concepts and words. It's cleaning them, filtering them through the knowledge base, all the time refining, and sometimes it doesn't make any changes, and sometimes something hits another thing and they say, there's some crud on that word, and there's some crud on that concept, and there's a dissidence inside the program, and it says no. It says, if dirty, do something clean, go run it again, run it again, run it again until you get that thing right, till it makes sense, till it's coherent, that kind of thing, something like that. So again, I don't see any need to think we have something called agency. I mean, hard determinism doesn't mean anything in terms of the fact that I can't live with hard determinism. There's no way I can personally enjoy it or find it obnoxious. And there's no way it can get in my way in any way as an idea. It just makes it known to me that I'm likely, I'm inevitably going to react based on what I have acquired in terms of life experience. And some of that life experience is going to be knowledge acquisition. And yeah. So we went a little bit into kid learning, literacy. And I'd almost argue that literacy isn't quite as important anymore. I don't, in that overt sense. I just knew that was going to happen. I'd be back. Alright, I'm back. But I'm not the same person as I was. Yeah, it changed between then and now. And now, who cares about this video? Now, so we'll play the end of his video. No point in playing the beginning. The beginning, I mean, he just rolls into the whole, look, literacy is really important. Well, kind of duh. Yeah, that's the whole way we can expand our vocabulary, right? But literacy in the sense of just knowing vocabulary is really the game, right? You don't really need to read and write it. You need to be able to understand it and convey it. But that's part of our brain mechanism, though, is that this does help. This extending our memory space by putting stuff on the blackboard, so to speak. I've even metaphored the consciousness as a kind of blackboard. One part of the brain throws the slop onto the blackboard, the consciousness, in terms of emotions and vagueness and fluff and blah blah blah, an attitude, a disposition, an initial reaction, and then the rest of the brain processes it some more, and then it kind of refines what's on the blackboard in your consciousness, and betters the focus, changes the focus. Our brain does that. It bounces my focus to different things consciously. I experience the result of that. I don't consciously do the focusing thing. My subconscious does it, and I think I'm doing it, but we know what's doing it. At least I know what's doing it. You might not know what's doing it, but yeah, it's a program running. And when the program runs, I think, I made it do that. No, it was going to do that, whether you liked it or not. And you just think you made it happen, but no, your brain made it happen. But anyway, so yeah, it just keeps playing with what's on the board, reading and writing to it. And then the big board, that's the real world. So you have the little board that's this representation of what's happening in the universe right now. That's what my consciousness is doing. It's saying, what's my picture of what's in the universe right now? What am I thinking about or focused on or seeing inside my brain, right? Versus what the real world is doing, what the real stuff is doing. And I'm just contemplating my little portion of it, my little piece of it, the stuff that's within my grasp, within my realm, and within my programming of desire and hunger and bullshit. And yeah, but it's all mechanical, just mechanical.
Imagination is that we remember the past and we imagine the future, but it doesn't mean that imagination is phony. It means that the future is a possibility that we're moving toward, and this is the whole point, is that people can act with regard to possibilities.
Yeah, I know, but that's not magic, and it's not agency, and it's not any of that kind of stuff. And what you understand to be the possibilities can evolve substantially with this knowledge-based thing. You can find new theories of what's going on in the physics. And there's a kind of physics to what we're doing. The unsustainable things. We can recognize an unsustainable curve and say, well, that's not going to work. So unless we change something, we're going to fly in the air and then crash like a rock. Something bad's going to happen. And we can recognize those things in advance. We can recognize things like a few years ago I recognized that there's this problem with this idea of liberty and the idea of power, technology. And that liberty and power probably aren't going to mix very well. And that the future, you just can't really get away with that whole Star Wars game where everybody just flies around in their light cruiser, yeah, wherever they want to go, kind of thing. There's no air, there's no space traffic controllers, and there's no, that ain't gonna work. It just isn't. You're gonna get done in by that power in the hands of anybody and everybody. So anyway, that scenario has no future. There's no logic that can make that work. And so you say, here we are, sitting on the cusp of doom. And, I'm sitting on the cusp of doom. I'm saying, look at this, there's just one of the dooms. There's a whole bunch of these other dooms. And I'm sitting there saying, and you're saying, okay, yeah, and all these assholes are thinking I'm some kind of homeless guy, some kind of Unabomber, with some kind of wacky theory that you're doing a bunch of crap that doesn't have a future. Because guess what? There is this linear lines, and there are plateaus, and there are facts here that aren't going to allow you to play the game you're playing. And we can recognize all of that, and that's really, it's nice that we can. We, when we say the word we, what do we mean? Me and my cat. Yeah, it's a power. It's a great thing that we have the ability to do that, but unfortunately the human race has absolutely no respect for intelligence or any of the byproducts of it that aren't something they can use to whatever, better eat your brains or suck your blood or, whatever other things zombies and mutants do. Anyway.
So when I say that there's an agency, I'm saying that there is a possibility that I'm moving toward, and I think...
Yeah. Well, see, I just wouldn't, obviously I wouldn't phrase it that way. But I mean, I have made these metaphors before that the whole process is filtering. I mean, it looks like chaos on the outside, but from the outside, I mean, what humans are doing, the squirming around, if you go through the whole history and, to build the overpasses and the roads and the lights blinking and all this stuff, you could just, do this blueprint of it. It looks like all kind of chaotic. But there's a certain order in it, in the sense that it's going to keep refining and refining and refining and refining. And it really just depends on who's in charge of the cultural memes. And that's the downside, is there's these places you get to where really dumb people are in control, and then you have really a bad society. It's like a bad king. Well, bad dominant cultural themes are also troublesome. So when, celebrities and sports heroes are defining your culture, you're probably not going to go anywhere good, for a while anyway. But it is all going to get filtered one way, whether you like it or not. It's going to keep getting refined and refined and refined. The arguments are going to have to get more and more precise. And through that process, it's all going to end up being, in some Spockian-esque logic equation that's going to make it pretty clear that you're, making the problems you're solving. That you're not an efficient organism.
To the hardline physicist, the hardline materialist, they're going to say, well, there is no such thing as a possibility. There's only the reality of the past.
Well, and that's true. So I guess you can't argue against that. You can pretend that you're arguing against it, but you don't have any evidence that you're creating something outside of that realm. So you are kind of just stuck with the staircase and the illusion that you can jump up a higher stair, or you can do something. You can't. You're really not going to do something. You're just going to be your brick. And you might be a really good brick, or you might be a sucky brick, but you're just going to be a brick in that staircase in the end. I mean, certainly having the program, being developed, in your development as a brick, if somewhere in that development you're inspired to be aware that you're a brick and that you want to maximize the function of your brick, that you want to be the best fucking brick there is, that's certainly going to have some sort of influence on your program, and going to have influence on your initiative, and going to make you a better brick player. A better brick. Yeah. I sort of had a thought on this before. I don't know exactly what it was relevant to, but I was thinking if we were face to face, if you're face to face with somebody and you're both holding guns at each other, and the rule is somebody's going to have to die. You can't go without one of you shooting the other one. And if you're, both kind of decent people, you're going to pause, and this is going to be a little difficult to say, okay, I'm just going to do the game and shoot and win, because you're going to sit there and pause for a second and say, well, maybe I'm not the guy that should win, because you have some understanding of productivity, that you're more concerned with your life being valuable, you being useful, you being productive, than you are concerned with your immediate welfare. And so if you're that kind of person, it's going to cause, I would be paused, right? I wouldn't be able to just shoot without being able to recognize whether I was sure I should win. And that would create an interesting dialogue, perhaps, between people in determining, what it's like this scenario with a lifeboat or something, where you all agree that it's unsustainable, that all 6 of you can't live, and the 2 of you have to go, and you could have a conversation about which 2. And those could always be very interesting conversations as you try to figure out what value really is the important value, and who has the most of that.
If anything, there's the coagulated record of the past, but there's really just the present. To which I want to say no.
Well, yeah, I want to say no to that too. That's not going to work. Look, the physicists are going to tell you that there's just the past, but just the present. But they're certainly not going to. They're not going to sit there and wipe out the past. They'll know that the past created the current condition, and that it's coiled the springs, and so you can't deny its existence, and certainly you can't deny the information value that's in that, and that it already has been pre-filtered. Again, it's like the eddy. The eddy swirls in the stream, and it changes what collects. I never really talk about that before, but it changes how the particles are filtered. On the bottom. So it through that process, it drags items to the center, that are the right specific gravity or weight or surface area, and so it changes what gets filtered.
What we have with the complexity of human nervous systems, once they've been coupled with very abstract representational systems like clocks, calendars, and schedules.
Yeah, I know, but they're not all that abstract, are they? They have a correlation to the actual function, and that's what I'm going to argue, is that the logic is built out of these premise facts. And so once you establish these facts, and you establish more and more facts, where you can go logically gets narrower and narrower and narrower. So that's what I mean by the filtering. Every fact creates a new block in the filter, a new, it's going to narrow this realm of possibility. And I would argue that the really significant thing of this, understanding this, is that there's this limited reservoir of facts, important facts. And once we answer all these big questions, we're going to be stuck with pretty narrow answers, and they're all going to be answers we're not going to like. They're all going to be answers that are pretty much going to say, you're just wasting time here, and you're wasting suffering, and you're just wasting. Okay, there is nothing to get done here except make a mess and then clean up some portion of it. And that's all you're doing. And that, as you logically know, is the definition of failing. It's a failing grade. When you're making more of a mess than you're cleaning up, you're fucked. And that's what we as a collective are doing.
They have enabled a whole series of interconnected, it has to do with money and networks and stock markets and futures and people's mortgages.
Yeah, I know. Well, because it's complicated doesn't mean it's spontaneous or random, or that there's any agency in it. It just means that it's complicated, that there's a lot of bits that are going into the decision, but it's still going to be a deterministic kind of end result you're going to get from what's being fed in by the past. And you're still going to be at a certain place in the staircase. You still have to climb it. You still have to go incrementally up the staircase of fact acquisition.
There's all kinds of things interwoven, interconnected, they're a massive probability field under which agency gets exercised.
Yeah, well, again, probability field of agency. You're just saying that the illusion of complexity, the fact of complexity creates an illusion of agency. Fine, you can say that, but let's just recognize it's an illusion of agency. It's not anything real.
And to people who pretend that there is no agency, I think part of the temptation of the computer age is to reintroduce a kind of hard determinism that allows those who create the computer programs to let other people just operate within the probability fields that they've created.
Yeah, I don't even really understand what that means. But I'm just saying the reality is that you are programmed by your experience, and your exposure to knowledge, your acquisition of knowledge based on what led to another thing, led to another thing, led to another thing, and what distractions you didn't have, or what liabilities you didn't have, or what all of those factors are going to decide what you acquired and what emphasis you have on these things. Like I said, I think if you took some real time to play with this word agency, you'd realize that it's a word that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. But even if you could say there was such a thing, there's no way to even imagine what that would be. The spontaneous understanding thought, there's no way to make one. There's no place to find where it came from. This knowledge that just exists and somehow pops into your head and makes you want to do something or think something's right, or where would that controller be except some other program that says this is more logical? I mean, the only place that agency can come from is your own conscience, your own subroutines that are saying, hey, wait a minute, I have knowledge of the fact that you pretty much are a selfish son of a bitch, and that let's take this and really look at it. Well, what are you really doing? Are you saving candy from a dirty baby, or are you stealing candy from a baby? Come on, I know babies are smelly and dirty, but you're not really rescuing the candy. Come on, don't give me that shit. Alright, you're just stealing, right? Don't give me that rationalization crap that the baby has cooties and the candy doesn't want to have cooties, and so you're going to rescue the candy from the cootie-covered baby. Come on. That's a story, fucker. Yeah, that's a program running that's doing that. Okay, that's just part of the non-agency. That's part of the rigid programming that takes place because you have knowledge of the fact that you're a lying scumbag and that you'll often cheat if something doesn't stop you, like, oh yeah, that knowledge base that knows I'm a fucker.
Language itself is its own kind of structured probability field. Literacy gives more structure, introduces more agency, more depth, and...
Well, again, see, so you talked about how powerful these words are. In the middle of this video, he did. He talked about, like I said, learning a second language and learning appreciation and word meanings, and this is just so important. I mean, here are you using a word over and over and over again, and I just I just think that that if this isn't the right word to use. It isn't a fair description of what takes place. Agency is not a fair description of what a human brain does. It's not what it does.
Capacity for long-term thinking as well as openness to past. Each subsequent communication technology, they all affect and impact what agency is and what we mean by agency.
I don't think they do. They all they can do is impact how well we compile information, and whether we're twittering or twattering or some of this stuff is very destructive to accuracy, because now they're cutting the definition shorter and shorter by a negative incentive. Not because it makes them more precise, not because it makes it more accurate. That would be good filtering. Now the filtering isn't for accuracy, it's for some convenience, and that's very destructive to the value content of the communication. So now the communication just gets more and more trivial.
But people who want to understand agency, this is where they want to go. You want to understand communication technologies, go check out the Media Ecology Association. Good, thanks.
That sounds like a self-interested promo kind of thing. Yeah, whatever. For which I am president and managing director and what do you call budget director? Yeah, whatever. Okay. I don't think I'll bother, but thanks for the suggestion anyway. So anyway, yeah. Well, like I said, I just I like that Corey is passionate about words and language and its power, but I don't think he's appreciating that the real power is in its ability to get us up the staircase, and that we could get up the staircase very, very quickly. We got a very steep incline of a staircase if we actually took this crap seriously and actually played with these words a little harder, force people to account for their use of the words. Yeah. and there's not an endless supply of it. There's not an endless supply of properties and categories, and you're going to run out eventually, and then all you're going to be left with is, this is the story. This is all there is, and there won't be any more room for the fantasies that people just keep playing to make it make sense. It'll just be what it is, and it's not going to be a great story. Yeah.